right, now it's time to get active and use what we know. It's time for our first table talk. It's tabletop exercise with Michael Hager.
All right, so I probably put some of these pages in the way of the projector. We'll see. And while we wait for this to come up, let me not multitask. All right. So these pages on the wall are for later, in case you're wondering. I've also been going around the tables and delivering some Post-it notes. So if you haven't gotten your Post-it notes yet, I'm coming to you. That's for the second interactive activity. Right now, what we want to do is to practice a little bit some of the things we talked about this morning. And it's wonderful how all the presenters for this retreat are reinforcing each other and saying similar things. We're having similar messages about the importance of community involvement, the importance of meeting people where they're at, the importance of understanding that there's a face and a heart behind numbers, right? So what we're going to do is to dive in a little bit. But first, we're going to name the phases of a QI project, list several tools that can be used in each phase of a QI project, and explain how to triangulate different data from different sources during a discovery phase of a QI project. We're going to describe how stakeholder engagement in this discussion can enrich our process for the entire EMA, and use this as an example for other things that we can do moving forward. So, when we're talking about a deep dive and the scuba analogy, we did cabin separating earlier, so now we're going to do scuba. So our tools are really our gear, right? We have different phases of QI lifecycle, and I like to think about this as an investigation, which is why I use the word discovery phase. The discovery phase is where you're trying to figure out what problems do I have, what potential problems do I have. We can be that person who we talked about this morning who's like, I know what's going on, and walk out the door without talking to anybody. We have all this information. We have provided enterprise. We have so much performance measurement data. We have needs assessments. We have surveys. We have focus groups. And we also have process and flow mapping as well. Has anyone ever heard of a journey map before? Oh, cool. A journey map is the cousin to a process map. And that's the idea of not just following a process map based on policies and procedures, based on how you were trained as staff. A journey map is talking to a patient or asking them to write out what their journey is. So when they get to the waiting room, what happens next, what happens next, what happens next? And it looks just like the flowchart, but it is done from the patient perspective. I think that this is a really important way to think about things, right? Because as we heard from John, what we say happens at high levels doesn't always happen on the ground. Who knows what happens on the ground? Our community. We know what happens on the ground. Ask us. Ask us. Have us make a journey map. Compare it with your process map. That's a really amazing phase, part of the discovery phase, in my experience. And then you can add the performance measurement data to help you out with that. The next phase is root cause analysis. So you've done all this digging, you've done all this searching, you've done all this finding, and aha, I have a couple of things that I might want to fix or work on. So you need to figure out what is causing this problem. Just because you have an artifact in the data doesn't necessarily mean that you know exactly where it came from, how it got here, how am I going to solve this problem. All you can see is, whoa, the number of people who are being admitted due to opioid use is skyrocketing. So we need to do root cause analysis to really get down at the bottom of what's going on. Driver diagrams are another way to think about root cause, and we'll talk about that later this afternoon. But basically the idea is that a driver diagram looks at root causes but helps you to generate a change idea at the same time. So instead of having two different processes, you can have one process where you're examining how to drive improvement And then what are the individual change ideas that you have that will help drive improvement in each of the following ways? Okay. An affinities exercise is something that we can do to prioritize change ideas or to prioritize any idea. And that's actually what we're going to be doing in our second activity, and that is what the papers and the post-its are for. Just to give you a sense, it's an out-of-your-seat, interacting, mixing with people. It's about this, and it's about this. Talking with people about your experience, about your understanding, about your expectations, about your hopes and your fears. That's root cause analysis. Yes?
For root cause analysis, if there's someone who's never done an UQI, and so could you just kind of back up a little bit and re-explain, because I think a lot of people have never done an UQI, so what's something just that you can hold in your hand?
Great. I think that the best way to think about root cause analysis is that you see a problem on the surface. You know, your car is rusting, right? So you can say, oh my God, my car is rusting. Scrub, 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 paint, 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 scrub, 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 paint, paint, paint. But that's not going to solve the problem that your car is rusting. Your car is rusting. What's causing the rust? Is it the stove? Did you not wax it? Did you not put the stuff on? So that's the root cause. Understanding, why do I see rust on my car? Why are there opioid admissions skyrocketing in Palm Beach? Why are we having X, Y, Z occur? Really, when you get down to the core, what is causing the problem? We're going to be going over this in much greater detail in our second interactive session. Absolutely. Thank you, Gary. Implementation, we're doing something called step measurement these days. And we're also going to talk about that in our second session. I don't think anyone's ever heard of step measurement because this is something that's like a new advancement in quality science. So we have a discovery phase. Basically, we want to create an inventory of all the information we have available. If we're someone who's trying to champion QI, if I'm bringing a community of people to talk together, I can't just invite people and be like, okay, talk. You actually have to have the data. And you have to have a sense of what data is available in case people are asking questions, so that you can go get that data. Or you can say, gee, we don't have it this year, but that's really important for us to think about for next year. And then follow through for next year. Root cause analysis is change idea generation. Okay? So like now that we have an inventory of all of our data, we have an idea of what the problem is. What are we going to do to potentially tackle that problem? How can we solve that problem? How can we make a difference? And then when it gets to the implementation phase, it's all like you just do it. So in terms of what we're trying to do in this activity, really what we're doing is a practice of the discovery phase today. We're going to be looking at case management services. So we're going to look at some quantitative data, and we're going to look at some qualitative data, and I'm going to ask you to take some notes. When we do this in the future together, it would be really great if we had packets of information that we can share, but we're not going to make perfect the enemy of good, and I didn't have time to make packets, so we're just going to take notes if you can. We're also going to review some qualitative data about the same problem with case management based on needs assessment findings that are pending. Once we have a chance to talk about all this together, we're going to let you at your tables talk about this. Talk about your personal observations, your community observations. What's it like to provide this service? What's it like to receive this service? What have you heard about this service? Everything about case management in Palm Beach County at your tables. So, let's begin, right? Definition is a great place to begin. So let's start there to make sure that we're all on the same page, right? In Palm Beach County, we have two types of case management. We have medical case management and we have non-medical case management. According to Policy Clarification Note 1602 by our federal partners, they have defined what medical case management is. Medical case management is focused on improving healthcare outcomes. There's a lot of clinical stuff. Non-medical case management is providing guidance and assistance in improving access to needed services. So people who are really helping a lot with eligibility, public benefits management, stuff like that, as opposed to the clinical pieces that we find in medical case management. Would anyone else from the case management working group like to add anything else about these definitions, or does this seem about right based on everyone's understanding where we're at today? Okay, right, see what I did there? I checked in with you. It's really important if you're facilitating something, a discussion like this, to check in with people. Move it over here, because I know that I can't stop. I did in Italian for too long, you know? So, so need for one service, this is another thing to keep in mind. Need for one service versus the other will be determined based on a new acuity scale that's under development. This is a statewide thing that is coming together. And so in order to kind of take the guesswork away from us so that we don't have to fuss today about the difference between medical and non-medical case management much, we can just know that there's an acuity scale coming. Our discussion can be about the acuity scale and what should be included in the acuity scale, but that's how the decision will ultimately be made. So let's begin with our quantitative findings. So quantitatively, let's first look at case management and funding. What we can see here is a cross-section over the last 3 years. And by the way, as I promised this morning, some of you have seen this information before. We're doing this for a reason. We're going over things we've already gone over before, so we can see the path in the forest we're walking down, and we're not entering it into this. If we enter something that's totally new in the dark with our eyes closed, it's really hard to know what we're seeing, right? So let's look at something we've already looked at and discussed before so that we have a new frame for it. So here's our case management funding, medical case management and non-medical case management over the last 3 years. Does anyone want to point out something that they see?
Increasing.
Yes, medical case management has been increasing each year between 2016 and 2018. What about non-medical case management? About the same.
Well,
It's decreased some, but like when you think about it went down and back up. So now let's look at some of our clients and utilization data. We can see here clients by year on the left and utilization by year on the right. Does anyone want to summarize what they see here? Yeah. Hey, that's something I saw too. The costs are going up, but the utilization is about the same. Are the clients going up? Is that something that maybe that's explaining the cost? No. In fact, it's an interesting thing where it looks like utilization peaked in 2017, and that's where there was a drop in clients. So there's something else going on here that we can't really see based on this, right? We do know, based on the data, costs are going up, but utilization and the client base is about the same. This is interesting stuff for us to think about. What about the difference between medical case management and non-medical case management? It's hard because of the scale, but it looks like we've seen similar fluctuations as in the past slide with funding. So this one does reflect a little bit more closely that kind of dip and rise. All right, let's go to the next one. Case management outcomes data. So here we're looking at non-medical case management outcomes and medical case management outcomes. We're looking at this as a partial care continuum. So the blue is retention, the orange is viral suppression. And you can see how each of these continua pieces changes over 3 years on each side. What do we see in the data? We do see improvement. Where do we see improvement? Yeah. Hey, success, right? What did we say this morning? We're tying ourselves to ultimate endpoint outcomes. Ultimate endpoint outcome in this case is viral suppression because mortality is just too depressing. So we can think about viral suppression as being success here. But what we heard from John is, do we always need to tie ourselves to data? Do we look at this and go, yay, I'll see you tomorrow at 9? Probably not. But there's enough patients that are still not achieving viral suppression that should be a cause for concern. But two, what else did we just see about the data? Let's put all these 3 slides together. Retention's not improving. That's an interesting thing, and you and I talked about that earlier. Talk a little bit more about that with the group. Share just a sentence. Okay, you're all right.
The starting point is really in testing, because as long as the percentage of people who are unaware of their status doesn't change, then that means that the following numbers can't be affected by a pretty small increase in the number of people who are aware of status carries on to a much larger increase in the number of, in the percentages, the 90 and the 90 for the next ones are bigger. So you end up, when you're looking at 69% in treatment, even if you assume 90% are aware of their status, and then the next number we had seen was 69% are in treatment, and then something like 90, even if you get to 90% suppressed, that 90% is actually only 63% of the population instead of the 73% it would be if you started with a higher number.
Yeah. So we need to think about this in terms of the system. Case management doesn't exist in isolation, does it? Case management is part of a fabric. Case management is actually a really important linchpin, almost a keystone to the way that our clients interact with services, and the way that we come into services, and how we stay in services. So I think that that's a really important point there. You know, I'd like to point out too that the difference between the low retention versus the higher viral suppression, and how the retention value in non-medical case management does appear to have gone up somewhat. But from a statistician's point of view, like, that's kind of a dubious, conclusion to draw based on the way that it went down first. But what's really important is that the blue bar is always smaller than the orange bar, right? And to me, I was sharing stories with some of you earlier. I'm one of those jerks that my doctor calls and says, oh my gosh, you go around and talk about this stuff and you're an expert. But when's the last time you came in to see me and had your light on? That's an interesting thing to think about too, how people's lives are complicated and layered. And we need to think about people holistically. So all of this to say that as far as, one other thing, is that we saw that the expenses going up. This is where we can see a little bang for the buck, right? Because expenses went up and viral suppression went up. It must be that we're acting more intensively in different ways with some of those patients to create this result, or something else is happening. So I don't know if there's anything else before we switch to qualitative. If anyone else wants to make any observations or statements about what we just saw with funding, clients, utilization, and outcomes. Anything else that's kind of kicking around for you? Yeah, I'll come to you.
I just wanted to know when you talk about retention and care for these purposes and these graphs, what does that mean exactly? Is that like one doctor's visit for the year, or what are we talking about?
That is a great question, and I was hoping that someone would catch on to that. I didn't include any definitions on these slides, did I?
No.
Thank you for calling me out on that. We all have the responsibility to call each other out on this stuff. It's really important that we have a common understanding about what we're looking at, right? Because if not, you're going to assume one thing, and these other folks over here will assume something else, and those folks back there will assume something else. This information is based on the provided enterprise definition, and it came right out of provided enterprise. So it is a doctor's appointment that is at least 2 doctor's appointments in a calendar year, at least 90 days apart. Right. Thank you for that question.
Okay, so viral load suppression is what?
Viral load suppression would be less than 200. For anyone who had a visit within the last calendar year, did they have at least one viral load? Or the most recent viral load? The most recent viral load was less than 200. So let's switch over to the qualitative now. We looked at funding, we looked at clients, we looked at utilization and outcomes. So here's 2 slides of qualitative data. This is a sneak preview of some of the stuff that you'll be seeing in the needs assessment. I didn't want to spoil too many surprises. But a lot of this is common sense that we talk about in the field all the time anyway. So I didn't feel like I was blowing up anyone's spot and sharing it. African Americans are massively disproportionately affected by HIV here. African Americans account for 17% of the population in the county, but 62% of AIDS cases and 52% of HIV cases. Whoa. The Part A grantee has concerns that case management expenditures are taking away from other medical services. So we heard from John earlier today about the importance of thinking about substance use, but not necessarily just treatment. But we need to think about things in terms of complexes. Well, guess what? If we have one service category that's continuously sucking up more and more money, that doesn't give us the opportunity to be light on our feet to serve people in the way that they need to be served, to be happy, healthy, and have a full, long life. Fear, discrimination, stigma all affect key populations. And this is what I was talking about before, right? We can't be rooted in quantitative data. We have to get qualitative, folks. We have to figure out exactly how, why, when, and where people are impacted by this stuff in their hearts, in their heads, in their feet. Referral networks and health system need strengthening. This is something that was really clear across the different areas that I read, that there needs to be greater coordination of this patient journey. So thinking of journey mapping is a great place to start. Talking with your patients about what their experience is with case management. And we can do this, again, we're just thinking about case management today. What about mental health screening? What about substance use screening? What about housing screening? What about transportation services? And I can go on and on. You get it, right? Mm-hmm. So let's just think about this for now for case management. Keep in mind, you can apply this more broadly to everything. So coordination of the patient journey is something that is a weakness, per the needs that we can strengthen. Training around how to best service all patients, regardless of background, which is a lot of training. It's a lot of hiring and recruiting practices probably too, in my opinion and experience. There's a lot of things that we need to do to make sure that people are being treated in a way that they expect to be treated, that they need to be treated, to enter and stay in services. So as I mentioned this morning, Palm Beach County has selected 4 priority populations to focus on. And this is something that's really important to 9990, but it's something that's really important too for our community's conscience and psyche to wrap our mind around, that we care about these folks and we're moving in that direction. We care about heterosexual African Americans. We care about the fact that they are so massively disproportionately affected by the population that no segment of our citizenry, of our brothers and sisters, should have to bear a burden. That's terrible. And what are some of the things potentially that cause that, per questions that were asked? The HIV knowledge and facts are lacking in this community, partly because it's really hard to be able to go and have a conversation about this because of stigma, because of the fear, because of the discrimination that people have already seen. I don't want that for me, I'm not gonna ask. I think something might be on with my body, but I'm not even gonna go there or think about it until I have to, until I'm very sick and there's no other choice for me, okay? So this is what leads to, late testing when people are already symptomatic. Late testing when people are already symptomatic. We heard in 9990, and also we've heard multiple times, hey, you're testing late, which means you have a high viral load, which means you're passing on the virus further, right? So this is one of the things too that's driving new infections, thinking about, the comment that was made up front a moment ago about how everything is tied together. So go to the next population. MSM, rejection, isolation, stigma, and other psychosocial barriers are really important things that prevent them from being able to access and maintain ongoing relationships with care providers. Migrant workers in this area, so we're talking both Haitian but Latino. Illegal immigrants are ineligible for most publicly available programs. Rhetoric around what we feel culturally about immigrants and immigration and people who enter one way versus another is a barrier that's pushing people out. It's a similar mentality that we'll see, I guarantee, in 6 or 7 years, if we keep talking the way that we are nationally about this stuff, it'll be the same issue as African American population because people aren't going to want to go. No, thank you. If I'm going to wait until I absolutely have to go because if you're going to send me home and it's a death sentence anyway for me to go home, send me home. This is heavy stuff. Youth, age 13 to 24. fears of judgment, inability to pay, lack of appropriate mental health and substance use services. So basically, what we see here is a service system that's designed to serve most of us, middle-aged people, you know, maybe late young adults, young professionals, like if we want to grin ourselves out. But you know, like ultimately, the disconnect here is that the service and the system was never made to serve them. It does not speak their language. It does not meet them where they're at. And so it's a mismatch. They can't fit. They can't find a way to kind of come in and stay. There's nothing to cling on to for that. All right? So, let's go back. We talked about funding, clients and utilization. We talked about outcomes data. And we looked at some general qualitative information from surveys and from focus groups. And we zoomed into our key populations. This is the practice of the discovery phase where we're looking at all this information. Now at your tables comes the fun part. At the tables, we're going to practice the piece where we're interacting with this information to come up with plans and ideas on how to make a difference. I don't think that we necessarily have to go through a formal root cause analysis because many of you haven't done that before, and I'll teach you that in a minute. We don't need to go through a formal driver diagram because guess what? Same thing. You know, I think the important thing is for now, put on your practice hat, your training wheels, look at this data, and talk at your table. What does this mean to you as a stakeholder in this HIV service system? It doesn't matter if you're a provider or a patient. It doesn't matter if you're not either of those two things. You care. You're here, so you care. So what does this mean to you? In what ways does case management, both medical and non-medical, make a difference in the lives of people living with HIV in our region? What successes and challenges have we noted in providing, receiving, or otherwise observing case management services that are in place within our EMA? Does the process work like it should? We'll have to rely on our consumer brothers and sisters to answer that question, right? What opportunities for improvement are apparent? Or what things would we suggest to help shore up gaps that we see find in the field? What other data would have been helpful to add context to your consideration and discussion of case management services? Remember the way I said, like, if you're presented with a packet of data, it's incumbent on you to say, hey, where's this? Hey, where's this? Hey, where's this? So I think that that's an important thing for you to talk about too, as a part of this exercise, just to kind of noodle, what else would have been really interesting, helpful, important for me to know if I'm going to be making recommendations to revise standards of care, if I'm going to be making recommendations on an allocation of services, if I'm going to be making a recommendation on the priority of services. Holy cow, I just named 3 of the most important functions of what a care council does. So you do this stuff already, right? So I think that it's really important for you to think about what information do I need to be most effective in this role. So we will come back together at 2:05. So basically we have about 15 to 20 minutes just to practice this. I'm going to walk around the room and make sure that everyone's talking about this and everyone's participating and sharing. Because it's really important that we all find our voice in this. We all care. That's why we're here tonight. Hello, everyone. Let's bring our attention back to the front of the room, please. All right. Well, it's now walking around the room. There was a lot of really great conversation about this. So I actually would like to just take this next 10 minutes to report out and to hear and to have you share with each other some of the great ideas and feedback that was being generated. So I don't know if there's anyone that wants to start. Yay! Hi everyone, we definitely want to pay attention to this, please. Hello. Thank you.
We had some a really good conversation, really good dialogue from everyone at the table. And one of the things that we discovered is that we tend to operate in silos within the organization, and it's just not enough communication amongst community providers, and even sometimes within your own organization, you find yourself operating in your own little body, and therefore the client tends to get lost in the whole process, and that affects retention rates. And we just had some really good input from Deborah here, who works in ADAP, and Deanna, who works with Compass. Just great input from everyone, all of them.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So I definitely see that as something that's important, decreasing silos, increasing internal and external communication.
Yeah, we're really trying to figure out the difference. Working in case management and being able.
No. So there's a question about the difference between medical and non-medical case management.
Yeah, basically being a case manager, being a non-medical case manager, there's not really a difference between the two for me, because my work was just in that medical case management. Aside from the definition, the workload itself is exactly the same.
So that's a very interesting thing, right? When we hear on the ground that what we're doing with people is exactly the same, and there's actually no difference, then maybe we need to think about the standard of care, the instructions that we provide to people, some of the information that goes along with this service with patients, so that we have a clear understanding of what our role is and how we interact with others. Because if we feel duplicated, or we feel as though there's something going on, then that can affect us. What did I say this morning about the quadruple aim? Our happiness, our empowerment, our ability to make a difference as providers will inform the experience of patients. Very important stuff. Thank you so much for sharing that. All right.
So we only were able to look at 2 questions because the discussion was very encouraging. But when we looked at the question number 1, and we're looking at what does the data mean to us as a stakeholder, when we looked at the data, with the data that you presented, and you clearly said that non-medical case management is to provide guidance and assistance, but medical case management is to really target the health outcomes, it looked like we're investing more money in guiding and assisting than we are actually trying to get to the outcomes. So so then that brought up questions of what is it that we really want to do? How is that going to affect any changes? If you look at, when you look at the numbers, it looks like there's so much being invested in non-medical case management. If we were to make a change, how would that impact the clients when we make that change?
Yes. I think that's an important thing, that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Don't forget Newton's laws. So this is important to think about how we're all connected together and what some of these things mean. That's not to bind ourselves into not making change or to be paralyzed, from the dilemma of endless possibility, but it is something for us to be thoughtful and to be respectful and to engage around. Absolutely.
So our conversation also got pretty deep, so we also only got to 2 questions. But for the first part, when we were talking about the data, for us, you mentioned the definition of the viral load suppression was 200, below 200. And I know that that's the CDC definition, but for a lot of us, I think it's less than 20. So we were wondering, with the data that you brought up, what really is the data? What is the less? Is that number lower than 200? So are we really that close to that 90%? That's the first part. Oh, there's more. There's more. And then you also mentioned that the data was coming straight from Provide, but the reality is that not everyone who's positive in Palm County is in that system. Because we are capped at 400% FPL, there are people who are in care who are over that, but they're not being counted in these numbers. So this is not the real numbers. What are the real numbers? That was the first thing. And then we got to the case management question, and we started talking about the effect. And yes, we would say as a table that good case management has a huge effect on people's lives. But when you have case managers who are just there for a paycheck, and are not feeling it, and are too bad, ignore people, or don't give someone a service because they happen to like this other client more, that's not good case management. Yeah, you're having an effect, but it's not a good difference. someone go through even more trauma than they've already been through, and now they're not going to want to be in care. Why would they? If the last place they're going to for support is youth support.
Can I put you on the spot to come up with a potential system-based? Can you put me on the spot? Put you on the spot. Can you come up with a systems-based approach? Because I know what you're talking about is very important, and most employers would take an HR approach. Nope, 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 fire out. Right? That's not going to make a difference. I don't think, because you're going to end up refilling a system-based approach to this problem. Yeah.
I think that as a system, we were people-focused. If we were focused on the client, on the person, the overall person, we get a lot into how much money is spent for support, how much money is spent for this. But if we look at the conversations that we've had today, right, the reality is that if I'm homeless and I'm hungry, the last thing I'm thinking about is when the next time I have to go to the doctor is, when I'm supposed to take my medication. Because I don't even know if I have to stay awake all night to take care of my kids to make sure someone doesn't steal them in the middle of the night because I'm sleeping in a car. Like, we have to be realistic about the priorities for a person as a person, feeling valued just as themselves when they've already been through all, again, I bring back trauma because we're not always a trauma-informed system of care.
Thank you. Trauma-informed system. Who else has some comments? Oh, here we go.
We decided to concentrate on medical case management. And we think that one size doesn't fit all. That patients, clients who are seeing case managers come with different levels of acuity. And we think that case management maybe should be layered, like category A, B, and C. The most acute patients, the less acute, and the healthy individuals. And we should, it's triage, thank you. We think we should possibly look at setting some standards or descriptions for what that is to help guide our case managers so that they provide the services the patient needs, or the client needs, but doesn't provide other things so that we can help to control costs.
Great. PBC taking notes and going back. See, who says you can't do all things to all people? All right, here we go.
I'm Christina, but you're Christina also, right? You were the one that was speaking more to the point about having a more informed system between the consumer, the clinic, administration, and Tallahassee was mentioned also. But did you want to speak to that? You're talking about how each component needs to inform the other in order to have a seamless system.
Yeah.
Just to add to what Elsa was saying, so you gotta understand that case managers are also human. And they bring a lot of their values into work. A lot of their stigma, a lot of their prejudice, a lot else goes on when it's management case. So if the case manager just stick to the rule and not be with the opinions or looking at the person and stigmatizing the person or thinking that this is the way it should be done. No, it's not the way it should be done. We should need to do it the way it medical said it should be done. So when you take their values out of it and deal with the medical aspect of it, then I think it will work.
One of the things that I want to share, and I did not share at the table, but I know it's a reality, is that a lot of agencies, including our own, tend to focus with their employees who are doing these jobs with their productivity rather than actually giving them the allowance to do the time to take care of the client. The numbers at the end of the month, if you look as if you're not producing, that doesn't look good for you. So I think we need to put that in the trash can and
Now, I know that there's more people that want to share, but we have to move on. And our next speaker is here. So if you have things that you wanted to say that are important to this discussion, put it in the bag. That's right, Shoshana. Put it on the card, put it on a post-it, and drop it in that bag.
Who's going to talk to us about undetectable equals untransmittable, and it's Dr. Howard Grossman, who is a medical director for Midway Special Care, Welcome Matters. He's an internist specialized in diabetes medicine and LGBT health. He taught HIV medicine in Eastern Europe and Russia, and helped set an entire in Nepal. And a fun fact, he's trying to learn Portuguese as well. Please welcome Dr. Grossman.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Howard Grossman, as you heard, and I used to work up here at the clinic for the last 2 years. But for the last, I guess about 8-9 months now, I've been down in Fort Lauderdale at Midway Specialty Care. So Midway is a not-for-profit that started in Fort Pierce. Dr. Louis Rampopal, who many of you may know, and Dr. Rampopal earned his practice as a not-for-profit, and we now have practices in Tampa, St. Pete, one is coming online in Orlando. We have a practice, a part-time practice here in West Palm Beach, 2.5 days a week with a nurse practitioner. In Fort Lauderdale, we have Miami, we may have Key West fairly soon. And so it's a very growing concern. And we are trying to take care of short and uninsured patients. We're doing a tremendous amount of craft resource prophylaxis, which I guess you didn't get time to talk about today too much, but it's a very important part of getting zero at 90 campaigns. So I'm going to talk about another piece I think that's very important when we're talking about getting people to buy into the need to be undetectable medication. And that's the U equals U movement. I'm going to start this with a little This is actually a song that was written by two African gentlemen who are pop singers, and you heard the beginning of it, Fight Stigma with Science. And that's really the basis of a lot of what's going on with U equals U movement, and it is a movement. To describe it a little bit more, here's an important presentation from the AIDS conference last summer.
Lastly, we need the undetectable is untransmittable or unique message to become standard knowledge worldwide. It needs to sound louder every day as this eases the burden of stigma and self-stigma of people living with HIV. It will save lives. suicides, and murders on trans sex workers especially.
So right off the bat, we're hearing about some of the impacts. So what is U equals U? U equals U stands for undetectable equals untransmittable. It is the idea that people living with HIV who have an undetectable viral load and take their medications as prescribed cannot transmit HIV to the non-infected person. Not may not, it's probably not going to happen. Cannot transmit. There is no gray area in U equals U. And the viral load, as you were talking about, because these are worldwide studies that brought about the U equals U movement and the idea of this, many of those studies are done with an undetectable viral load being less than 200 copies. As somebody was saying earlier, here in the U.S., we pretty much use less than 20 or less than 40, but clearly this occurs when viral loads are less than 200. And it's a game changer. So why is it a game changer? Well, first of all, it transforms people's sexual, social, and reproductive lives. The idea that you can't transmit the virus means, you can have sex more easily. You take fear out of the idea of sex. It transforms social lives by removing stigma. And probably reproductive lives by lessening the chance or making zero the chance of transmitting HIV from mother to child. It takes away stigma on many different levels. It encourages testing, uptake, adherence, and retention in care. If you know that by staying in care and staying undetectable, you are going to be one of these people who can transmit, I think it makes it more likely that you will. And getting that message across to people, I think, is important. It provides a strong public health message for universal access. So here in the U.S., it's been quite a few years now that we talk about treating everybody with HIV at any level of CD4 counts. This isn't necessarily a concept that's taken over in the rest of the world until recently, where resource-poor settings, where money is a big problem, HIV care has been directed at the sickest people, and the idea of treating everybody to get them undetectable was not something that was prominent. Again, this is an effective strategy that impacts the lives of all people living with HIV and people affected by HIV. And it does bring us closer to ending the epidemic. The more people who are undetectable and not transmitting the virus, the less likely, the more likely this epidemic will end. The whole idea of undetectable equals untransmittable has actually been growing now for almost 12 years. So in 2007, the Swiss HIV Consortium came out with a statement saying that in heterosexual couples where a positive person was undetectable, they were not going to transmit the virus to their negative partner, and they didn't really need to worry about condoms. That was a radical statement. People really freaked out about it. They only said it about heterosexuals. They didn't apply it to other groups. But later in 2014, there were statements from the Canadian group, the Europeans came on board, and then there have been multiple scientific studies. So HPTN 052 showed a 93% risk reduction with early treatment. Now this wasn't the, no transmission, but they showed significant benefits of early treatment. In the partner trials 1 and 2, you had about 77,000 episodes of condomless intercourse taking place between the couples in this study, not a single transmission of HIV. And in the opposite attract study, same thing, 17,000 episodes of condomless sex. And when you start talking about these huge numbers, it's like, who's monitoring this? And how are they counting? But that's the data. And not a single transmission. And blips and sexually transmitted infections do not seem to affect this pattern. That's something we're always worried about. What happens if people have a slight increase in their viral load, when it goes back to detectable. It doesn't seem to be a problem. It doesn't indicate there haven't been any transmission. 0 equals 0. So why didn't we know this? There's a huge gap between, I think, knowledge, the scientific knowledge, and what we know on a community basis. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Science doesn't have a publicist. The You movement has been driven by people living with HIV. Bruce Richmond, who you see later in a video, is the head of the Treatment Action Coalition, or the Prevention Access Campaign. Thank you. Well activist. And he really single-handedly has really pushed this idea in forums around the world and got an incredible amount of sign-on, as you see. There are barriers to communication, paternalism. I think as healthcare providers and case managers and everybody involved in healthcare, we lived through the scary experience of the HIV epidemic. We think we know better, and a lot of us haven't been willing to change. And this is a dramatic change in the message that we put out there. Prejudice, I think, certainly stigma, and we've talked about that today. I'm sure with HIV. Sex negativity, sexual topics are off limits. I just have to tell this little story. One of my patients in Fort Lauderdale is a transgender man. And just to show you the effects of sex negativity, he's transitioned about 15 years ago. Very butch, incredibly muscular, hairy guy. You have no question this was a man. And he was going to a doctor for about 5 years, and then he complained of some lower pelvic pain. She sent him to get a prostate exam from a urologist. She never looked below the belt. And that's something that I find very common here. There are doctors who just don't make it anymore. And I think a lot of that feeds into the sex negativity that we see. There's a whole lot of layers of stigma. Resistance to change, as I mentioned. This is a movement. It is, again, coming mostly out of the HIV, people live with HIV communities, and it's taking us providers a lot longer to come on board, but that's been changing. From January to July 2016, people started signing on to a letter supporting the idea of undetectable equals untransmittable. You can see me from August for the New York City Health Commissioner, Assistant Commissioner, many of you may know about, and Dr. Tony Fauci up in the right-hand corner. So some of the biggest names in HIV have come on board with the U equals as well as many cities and different localities. Just to show you, these are two people who the impact of this, whom the impact of this has been profound. So Gina Marie is an activist from New Orleans, and she had isolated herself for many years and not had any relationships because she was so worried about passing on HIV. And she started dating, and she has real hope for love in her life, which is kind of an amazing change. And there's so many people living with HIV who've been isolating themselves in this way. Brady, a man from Nashville, again, somebody who's tried to commit suicide several times since his diagnosis. He thought he was toxic and unlovable, and since the U movement and getting involved in that, he's learning to change, and he's become a leader in this movement. In the summer of 2017, Washington, D.C. came on board.
Today, D.C. becomes one of the first cities in the nation to support new HIV strategy called U equals U, which stands for undetectable equals untransmittable. And through this strategy, we're working to ensure that all residents living with HIV take their medications on a consistent basis. This daily routine will suppress the virus until it becomes undetectable. When that happens, a person living with HIV will not transmit the virus. People living with HIV have long borne the brunt of stigma associated with this disease. And now we will continue to work to make sure that they are empowered to take the lead on ending this epidemic. So we need to.
So you can see here also some of the publicity that's gone out in DC since then on buses, on bus shelters. to get this message across. In Paris in 2017 at the International AIDS Society meeting, more scientists signed on to the U=U movement. This is a statement from Dr. Hula Montana from British Columbia, a leader in the field, who says, the global medical and scientific community at the forefront of HIV research and care came together in Paris for the 9th International AIDS Society Conference, where they announced unequivocally that an undetectable HIV viral load means HIV is untransmittable. And you'll see in the next few slides the numbers of people who have signed on to this from important scientific bodies, from the directors of National HIV/AIDS Services, HHS, the Public Health Services, CDC, the NIH, the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, and all of these have made comments. And here you see from the NIH and the Director of Office of AIDS Research why it's a game changer. And you can read this for yourself. And I think most importantly, her statement that U=U is an essential component for ending this epidemic. That getting this message out there, keeping people adherent, making sure they know what that means for their outcomes is really important if we're going to end this. Again, UNAIDS has signed on to this statement and is trying to make more people aware. Scientific journals like The Lancet have had editorials backing this and saying that the fact that the CDC came on board has had tremendous impact already. You can see there are about over 730 organizations, 95 countries have signed on to the U=U movement. This is really big, and the question becomes, why haven't we heard more about it here? And here in the United States, you can see departments of health and city and county public health departments that have signed on to U=U. And I think one of the striking things when you look at this is there's nothing to follow. And that has to change. And so I would encourage the health department here, and I've said to the health department in Broward, it's time to sign on to this and to this movement, that we accept this, that we are going to communicate it to our clients, and that it's going to become a key part of ending the epidemic. Woo! Here you can see a couple of things that are available, or other places where that have endorsed U=U, including the guidelines commissions in the U.S., the World Health Organization's guidelines, many places. There's been certainly in the rest of the world an awful lot of public relations and communications tools that are out there for communicating U=U. In many languages, including on Grindr. And I knew before I was preparing this, before I started to look at this, I never knew Grindr exists in many different languages. And they're putting out the U=U message. In 2016 was when this movement really took off. And I remember meeting with Bruce, and truthfully, I have to say, when we sat in a restaurant in New York, and he said to me, "What do you think about this?" And I was a typical doctor, and I sort of said, "Well, Bruce, do you really want to go there?" I said, "Yeah, we haven't seen it happen yet." This was actually before some of the partners data was out there, but I said, "Do you really want to go there? Do you want to take the chance that there's one transmission? You know, this messes up." And he was like, and you know, it was kind, it was friendly, but you know, I regret that I didn't come on board earlier with this, because I think, you know, you get a doctor to say that something is impossible. It's almost impossible. I should almost say it's impossible to get a doctor to say something's impossible. We always have to hedge our bets. It's a typical scientific thing, but from a public health standpoint, it doesn't really communicate the right message. And that's where language matters. And so again, I emphasize, be consistent and be clear. Minor word changes and overly cautious attitudes can have a big impact. So if you use words like might and low risk and use a condom just in case, versus being very directive, it communicates a different message. So if you say you can't pass it on, you can't transmit HIV, you're effectively no risk or zero risk. This will prevent HIV transmission is very different than it's extremely unlikely, nearly impossible, almost no risk. That leaves people in a gray zone. And I will tell you, I learned a long time ago with communications, especially for patients. I remember, it must have been about 1987. I don't know if you all, if any of you are old enough like me to remember all this, but in around 1987, 1988, there was an article in Cosmopolitan magazine that basically said that women, that heterosexual women were not at risk for HIV. And I remember watching Nightline on PBC, and it was a psychiatrist who written this article versus Dr. Matilda Krim. And many of you may remember Dr. Krim was the founder and the director of Amtrak for a long, long time. Really leading lights in HIV. She died a few years ago. But Dr. Krim was a scientist. And this guy was sitting there going, it's absolutely the case that women are not going to get HIV. Women are not at risk. This is a publicity stunt by the gay community to get more people involved, and women don't get HIV. And she was sitting there and saying, well, to the best of our knowledge, from everything we know, we think this is what's going on, blah, blah, blah. He won that debate hands down, even though he was completely 100% wrong. So I think when we're trying to communicate messages here, especially in public health, we have to have really definitive language. We can't, we have to stop being such good scientists. So maintaining undetectable is untransmittable is a group effort and involves many arms, but it involves treatment, it involves staying up to date on laboratories, it involves that connection, and that's where the case managers are so important for increasing that connection between people living in the community and the providers who are writing the prescriptions. That's really important. And again, 200 copies seems to be a magic number. That is the number that they use worldwide. So even though we look at more intense numbers, it seems the transmission stops and becomes zero at that level. And you know, the other message for patients is if patients' viral load is less than 1,000 copies, there's no clinical progression. Okay, that's a lot higher than our current undetectable, but at 1,000 copies, clinical progression stops. Do we want them to go further? Yes, because if they have 1,000 copies, eventually they're going to develop resistance. But that's a different issue than the fact that their clinical progression stops. Now, ubiquity does not apply to breastfeeding, and there's a lot of movement to try to get the data to talk about breastfeeding. Is it okay for women who are undetectable to breastfeed? Because especially in developing countries, that's a huge issue. Because the formula is so expensive, and breastfeeding really is the way that most women work with their children. And you know, clearly women are especially in the developing world, are hanging on this information. It doesn't apply to needle sharing, again, but people who share needles also have sex. So it's still an important message to give to our patients who are using needles. It's part of our new toolbox in changing HIV criminalization trends. This idea, you know, if people in certain states, people have been arrested for having sex, even if they disclose, or if they haven't disclosed and they're using condoms, but if they're undetectable, they're not at risk. And so why should they have to face stigma in order to have sex? And there's a lot of people working on these. It's important to understand that as we talk about this, that we don't judge harshly people who aren't undetectable. And that's been a risk that people have needs to be undetectable, those are the people who are going to protect us, and those are the people who are going to have the epidemic. And how are we going to talk to the people who can't get to undetectable, who haven't gotten to undetectable, for a number of reasons. Sometimes not their choice, and barriers to care. Just before I came up here, I saw a young guy who ran out of insurance last year, lost the contract that he was working on, his contractor or computer person. So he didn't have money, but he made enough money in the last year that he didn't qualify for any help. He's been off medication since last March, and now he finally has insurance again. He doesn't qualify for Ryan White in Florida, although he would qualify for it in a lot of other states. You know, he doesn't qualify for any other assistance, and he was out of luck. And so he was off medication. Fortunately, he's okay, and we'll see what his numbers look like, and he's getting back on meds, but, you know, that wasn't his choice. Again, I think we can use this idea of U equals U to help to say that we need to serve those people. We need to stop letting those people fall through the cracks. This should be something that we can bludgeon politicians who don't seem to get this with. And I guess part of the movement is to say have more sex. But that people can have sex even if they're not biologically suppressed. I think that's important to remember. One of the things that I talk to people about when I'm talking about PrEP and talking about condoms is that we had sex for the last, you know, until people became undetectable sometime in the 2000s, really, when large numbers of people started to become undetectable. We were having sex with people who were positive, but we were using condoms. And we were protecting ourselves, and we were preventing transmission that way. So just because somebody is undetectable doesn't mean that they have to be sexually celibate. So there are a number of advocacy strategies that are being employed, rights-based, outcomes-based, personal health and public health, and getting away from the shame on use way that many providers practice medicine. It's time to also treat HIV stigma as a public health emergency. I think this is another message that's coming out of this movement that's really important. And that U equals U is a way to help fight that stigma. So we have our old way of thinking that HIV positive people belong in the class 6 sense, and our new way of thinking that HIV positive people are part of our community, part of all of our communities, and that you know, it would change the way we think of people.
Oh, it looks like we've got one more, and then it has to come from you yourself.
Hi, Allison. This is today is marking a revolution in what it means to live with HIV. So, thank you so much for your research. I have a question on behalf of the U equals U campaign. There are many providers that are still not accepting this message. They try to focus on the risk is not zero scientifically, or they focus on the patients aren't going to be adherent and they won't know that they're detectable, or they say there's a rise of STIs already, so they don't want to share this with their patients. We get every single kind of excuse. What would you say to clinicians or any other information provider who is withholding this information from people with HIV?
I just want to pay tribute to the U equals U campaign. It's been astonishing. I think the time for excuses are over. I think it's very, very clear that the risk is zero. So I very much think we have to grab this. I think if you're on suppressive ART, you're sexually non-infectious, and yeah, the time for excuses is over. Again, pay tribute to you and your work.
Well said. Thank you, Alison.
That was again the International AIDS Conference. So what can we do? Change the way you personally talk about HIV and risk. Conduct more trainings with staff to change the way they speak. Train community liaisons as ambassadors to go out and get this message out. Educate people at community events. That's what we're doing today. Require medical community grantees to get this message out. Make it part of the grants. Organize forums, as we always do. Research ways, other effective, other means, other ways to and funding more biomedical interventions to help people stay virally suppressed. You can stay connected on social media, and here's a number of websites. The Prevention Access Campaign is the campaign that's behind the Youth Boosting movement, and these are some websites that you can look at. Before I take questions, and that's this. You know, we talk about a cure. Patients are asked about a cure. People always talk about a cure. A cure is elusive. You know how difficult this virus is and how difficult it is to control. So getting a biologic cure where you are going to cut HIV out of all the cells of people who are infected, that's science fiction. It's happening. I mean, there are pieces of it happening in research, but to me, it's still years away. But right now, we have the tools to stop this epidemic completely. And if you think about it, none of us in this room are going to last forever. When an entire couple of generations of people are gone, if we can prevent all new infections, we end this epidemic. The virus is gone from the human population. But so we can end it with the tools we have. If we get every person who's positive to be undetectable, and we put every person who's at risk on things like PrEP, or practicing much more protected sex, then we can stop the epidemic in generation without all this but that takes an incredible commitment on one. I think given the lack of resources that are coming down from Washington or from Tallahassee, it's going to take a community level effort. It's going to take an effort by all of us to work in the country to make this happen. And so I encourage you to continue the work you're doing. And again, thank you, and I'll take questions.
First, I want to say thank you so much for your presentation. I think the U=U program is going to be a great access to Palm Beach County in terms of trying to get our clients that are HIV, our communities that are HIV infected into care. We've been struggling with that. We've been struggling with this new message. I think it's going to change things. How we go out about the education, I guess we're going to need some more training. But anyways, about condom use, even though we're saying this, the U=U is non-transmissible in terms of HIV exposure, but do we still promote condoms in people that are mainly participating in high-risk behaviors in terms of contracting other STDs? I don't think we should leave that message out. I think that's a very important piece of maintaining risk against other STDs. So how would you present the message to people that you feel are in like high-risk zip codes, that you see a large number of cases arising from those different communities in terms of HIV and other STDs?
Thanks. I think that's a really important question, and I really appreciate your enthusiasm about this. Thank you. You know, I agree. I mean, condoms are definitely useful given the state of STDs. Let's face it, STDs in the 3 counties in South Florida are on the rise, and they're huge. And these are some of the most impacted counties, Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach County, as far as STDs go, as far as HIV infections go in the country. I think part of it is we have to give a more, when we're talking economies, we have to start taking a more nuanced approach. We have to, one, realize that men hate condoms, and we have to start with that. And that's been true forever, but nobody's wanted to talk about it. And why do men hate condoms more than anything else is because a lot of men lose their erections when they use a condom. And so the older men get, the more it's going to happen. So, you know, since I moved to Florida, and I'm much more of a retired community, older community, you know, I hear it all the time. So how do we help people negotiate condoms in a different way? I think we have to realize that there are probably some safe spaces for people not to use condoms. We have to talk about the fact that condoms still prevent STDs. But I think there are situations. So let me just tell you a little bit when I'm talking about PrEP with people, for example. This is where my discussion goes. So I tell them all about PrEP. I tell them about how it prevents HIV. I tell them that the message, the party line I'm supposed to give is you're supposed to use condoms and PrEP. And I do say that people who do both are going to be the safest people out there, no question. But clearly that's not what's happening out in the communities. And so we look at the numbers, let's look at the facts. If you look, the estimate last summer was that there were 300,000 people on PrEP. There are 6 documented cases of people who were actually taking the drug who became positive. Now there are people who weren't taking the drug who became positive, but that they weren't taking the drug. But 6 documented cases. 5 of them were infected with multi-drug-resistant virus, which we don't see as much as we used to, but it's out there. But it's still 6 out of 300,000. That's amazing kinds of numbers. So most of the people out there that submitted who aren't using condoms are probably going to do okay if they're on PrEP. But I've had patients come back to me and say, well, that's great. It makes me feel much more comfortable about PrEP. It's really more effective than I even thought. But I don't want to be number 7. But I don't want to use condoms all the time. So how do I think about that? Well, I think there's another big safety level depending on how well you know somebody. So if you know somebody well, they're either positive or negative. If they're positive, if they're negative, they're either on PrEP or they're not. If you're on PrEP and they're on PrEP, and you both know each other, you know that they're taking the drug, and you know that they're reliable, you know that they go to the doctor every 3 months to get tested, it's a rational decision not to use condoms in that situation. From an HIV standpoint, not from an STD standpoint. If you're on PrEP and they're not on PrEP, but you know they got tested for HIV last month, not 2 years ago. You know that they get tested for STDs. Maybe you're the only person they're having condoms sex with. There's a lot of things you know that can help you to make a safety decision. If you're with somebody who's HIV positive, who's undetected, they're using drugs. But 6 documented cases. 5 of them were infected with multi-drug-resistant virus, which we don't see as much as we used to, but it's out there. But it's still 6 out of 300,000. That's amazing kinds of numbers. So most of the people out there that submitted who aren't using condoms are probably going to do okay if they're on PrEP. But I've had patients come back to me and say, well, that's great. It makes me feel much more comfortable about PrEP. It's really more effective than I even thought. But I don't want to be number 7. But I don't want to use condoms all the time. So how do I think about that? Well, I think there's another big safety level depending on how well you know somebody. So if you know somebody well, they're either positive or negative. If they're positive, if they're negative, they're either on PrEP or they're not. If you're on PrEP and they're on PrEP, and you both know each other, you know that they're taking the drug, and you know that they're reliable, you know that they go to the doctor every 3 months to get tested, it's a rational decision not to use condoms in that situation. From an HIV standpoint, not from an STD standpoint. If you're on PrEP and they're not on PrEP, but you know they got tested for HIV last month, not 2 years ago. You know that they get tested for STDs. Maybe you're the only person they're having condoms sex with. There's a lot of things you know that can help you to make a safety decision. If you're with somebody who's HIV positive, who's undetected, well, you equals human, that's not to use it. If you're dating somebody, you know them well, maybe you're monogamous together, you may choose not to use a condom. And again, reasonable decision. So what I'm doing is giving people very specific scenarios and saying, think about your condom use in this situation. Think about what you know about the person you're with. Now, if you're with a person who you don't know at all, is the risk of STDs going to be higher? Yes. Is the risk that they be one of the people who's carrying a resistant virus? Yes. Does your risk go up from both HIV and STD standpoint? Yes. So maybe that's the place where you still want to use a condom. Then I'm giving them a plan. I'm not telling them every single time, and it's some really hard-nosed message, but I'm giving them some ways to think about it. So that's kind of how I've done it. I know it's a long-winded answer. Yes. Right. But again, it means talking about sex.
Thank you very much for your presentation. You also use very noticeable and very important role in these applications in HIV care. However, I'm just a bit disturbed about one statement you have in your presentation. If you could go back to that, you said treatment is a personal responsibility and never a public health responsibility, but put it that way. It's those of us who are in public health and have been doing disease investigation is very troublesome for us. The reason I'm saying that is that we know that when people are not taking their medication, it becomes a public health responsibility because they affect other people from our disease investigation findings. So I just would suggest that you change that statement.
Yeah, because that's a little problematic statement from me as well. That's from having partly doing movement, and I think basically what they're trying to say is that as public health people, we have our responsibility is really to get people care and to make every situation possible to help them do what they need to do. But that in the end, that each person has to take responsibility for themselves. That as public health people, in TB you can keep somebody confined to a hospital, and my hospital where I trained in Kings County, we used to have people who were incarcerated there to take their TB meds 40 years ago. But we're not in that place with HIV, so we need to really look to help people to take this responsibility for themselves. I think that's the message that I take your point.
I want to repeat this again. Maybe you don't understand what I'm trying to say. I've worked as a DIS before, and I think such a statement misrepresents our efforts to control HIV in the community. The reason being that we see that people who are not taking their medication, they invariably transmit HIV. So maybe the word never, a public health issue of responsibility, I think is misinformation for us and for the community as well. Because it puts people in that realm of not taking responsibility to protect their partners, thinking that if they have to take their medication, they are not answerable to anybody. And also looking at the cost involved, the amount of money the government spends just on medication for one HIV patient is almost 80,000 a year. And so those kind of statements, I think, they are a bit worrisome. Yes, U equals to U is good, and that's what we want to achieve, but the statement can never public health issue or problem. I don't agree with that. And I think you have to make it. Thank you very much.
Anybody else? Comments? Oh, we got one here. Before I get the love.
Hi, thank you so much, Dr. Grisman. One thing that I noticed when we were talking about the point of outreach and how we explain U equals U, and how you really broke it down in a very nuanced way. However, I do, also recognize that, the reality of outreach and a lot of times scenarios that we find ourselves in outreach is that we don't have as much time and space to really go into the intricacies and nuances of negotiating condom use and safer sex practices and things like that. But as you were speaking, I was brought back to a conversation I had in my own workplace with a coworker about talking about, when it comes to negotiating condom use, talking about status, and there's always that question of, and you can see it on the dating apps and on the hookup apps, whatever, when it has the question of status. People will say negative on PrEP, positive undetectable, this and that. So I think one way that's helpful to sort of to make it a little bit easier as a synopsis of what you said is, okay, what's your status? Say the status, okay, so you know that. How do you know? That second question of how do you know is so important. Okay, so you said you're negative. When were you last tested? Oh, I was tested in June of 2016. It's probably problematic. Okay, so you said you're positive. Oh, and you're undetectable. Okay, great. So you've never missed a dose. You have not missed a dose this month. Oh, well, I did go on vacation, and or I did age out of my parents' insurance, and I did have a disruption there. Okay, when were your last labs taken? So there is a conversation, and of course, it becomes sometimes one part, yes, it becomes a little bit less sexy when we're talking, especially like casual sex encounters and things like that, but it is, at least we know that that secondary question, it leads to a whole lot of other questions.
I agree. I totally agree. Thank you. So, and I always talk to people about that as far as STDs go. One thing I've found down here in Florida especially is people don't get tested appropriately for STDs. So most people, if they get tested, they get a blood test for syphilis and they even cover for gonorrhea. A lot of places do not do oral and anal testing, which is what you need to do. You have to do 3-point testing if people are having oral sex or anal sex. And so what I say to people is if somebody tells you they're STD-free, your next question has to be, how'd you get tested? If they don't know about the swabs, it's not their fault. They just don't know if they're affected or not. And so again, like you say, that might be a trigger to use condom. I think, and you're right, we're so busy and we have so many questions to ask, we don't always have time to get into the entire discussion. But I think if we can do pieces of it, we're not seeing these people once, we're seeing these people multiple times. If we can do a short piece each time we see them, that over time we will communicate that message and maybe educate them and not overwhelm them for ourselves.
I don't think I need a mic, but I totally agree with what you're saying. That's why it's very necessary to not just hit those target areas just one visit. You need to be consistent in going back and back, because that way you know you're going to get your total message across. Also, it's very important to have a strong networking system, whereas for those questions that you're not sure of, you can pass them on. I pass them on. Okay? That's what I'm going to get. What I need to do is make sure that we have one person that I reached out that day that may not going to become HIV positive. There's going to be one person now I know going to know about you equals you. And if we give it to the right gatekeeper, the message is going to go a long ways. Okay, so that's how it works. Come together as a unity and making sure that we have everything in place. Yes, your name, please. Yes, sir. I'm Brown. Brown is in place, Linda is in place, Diana is in place, but who else is going to be in place for me to carry the mission on? We need everybody in place, and I thank God we got all these community, great people in this community, or agencies in this community, that we can have a strong networking system that we all come together as one. Not the health department is this way, Catholics this way, child care is this way, comforts this way. We need to be in unity when it comes to combat this infection, because it's really strong.
Thank you all very much.
very special person. This person has dedicated her entire professional life to the HIV community. 20 years at the health department, 15 years before that at CAP, which is now FAMCare. Please, would everybody help me thank Mary Piper Campbell.
clients through the dying process. And, you know, I vowed then that no client should ever die alone, and he was part of that, Paul was part of all of you, you know. Case managers then, we could set up 24-hour vigils with clients that were dying, and they had no one, so they were not left alone. And we've come a long way, and now we're helping people really live, not helping them die. And the U=U movement is like so phenomenal. It is so unbelievable that we've reached this point where really our clients can have a whole new vista and the stigma taken away. So Dr. Grossman, I really appreciate you coming and sharing and promoting that, and I'm hoping everybody in this room will take that message back and continue. But I just have to say thank you. It's been an honor to work with you all. It's been an honor to work with our clients. And unfortunately for you, I'm still going to be involved in care process.
Good afternoon, everybody. How are we all doing? Was lunch good? I heard it was good. As you can see from my beautiful white coat, I did not cook any of it myself. I have a spectacular team of chefs and students back at Cafe Joshua that took care of all that for you today. So I want to thank you all. Thank you. I really want to thank you all for supporting the programs and services of Laura's Place. You know, Joshua Catering is a program that we're so proud of. You know, we've been able to grow that catering business really to become a major player in the marketplace. And the most important part of that is that we're able to train the students that are in our programs, help them get a career, and then help them find jobs in the community. So you guys, just by having lunch, you've supported that program and given those students an opportunity to work in the industry, learn how to do good food, and then that translates into jobs for them. So you guys are awesome. Thank you very much.
Hey everyone. Go Pokey Tony! Alright, so we only have about 30 minutes left, and I want to make sure that I get through as much as is possible, because I do want you to practice with any exercise. We want you to be able to do it as much as I am. But for this section, we want to explain how to use at least one root cause analysis tools. We want to describe the concept of step measurement, which is an important new concept in quality improvement science, and provide examples of how this full QI process can be used in our own work as providers stakeholders who really care about this population. In short, to copy what they say at IHI and TQII, we want to ask ourselves the question, well, what can I do by next Tuesday? Okay. As a review, this is the QI process that we've been discussing. Discovery, root causes and change ideas, then leading to implementation. And that would be an issue with the formatting from before. But the idea is that it's very similar to what we have in, let's see if I can just fix that. It's very similar to what we have heard earlier from John and some others. That basically what our framework is here for the discovery, root cause, and implementation is the same thing that we do in medicine, where we assess, we diagnose, and we intervene, right? So we can think about these things as a similar process. Get the information, think about it critically, bring in other peats as needed, which in quality improvement for HIV is every time, and then go ahead and get started. So let's think about root cause analysis, going to Mary's question from before, so that we can really push this out for you to have a solid understanding of what we mean. Once you identify a problem, ask yourself why? So there's different ways that we can think about root cause analysis. This is a very common one. Who here has seen a fishbone diagram before? And a fishbone diagram is called a cause and effect diagram because what we do is we put what we want to happen here. This is the ideal future state, or for the problem statement. You can do it either way. And what you want to do then is to look at what is contributing to that from a cause standpoint. So let's take our issue. Let's take an issue like mental health screening. So we want to improve mental health screening so that we screen as many people for mental health as possible among our patients. So what are the things that are the barriers to getting in the way? There's stigma around HIV. There's stigma around behavioral health. There is issues about confidentiality that are related to this stigma. Some of these things are bigger bucket things, and some of these things are little things that kind of fit into those bigger buckets, right? So that's what all these different lines mean. If we were to think about, stigma, we could put stigma here as a big category probably, and then put HIV stigma, behavioral health stigma, fear of being known and being shunned, fear of being called crazy, things like that, taking too many pills. All these different things are things that we can do in a discussion to create this sense of where these causes are driving our effects, basically. This is something that you want to do again as a team because you're not going to have all this information inside of one person or even inside of two people. Usually to do this properly, like I said before this morning, right, we need to involve consumers. We need to really try to think about the cross-section of people who are involved in this problem so that we can involve them in the solution. Patients, providers, staff, all hands on deck. So this is a really great way to think about root causes. As a conversation, once you have the entire thing, filled out, you can then take this around with you on a show, to different provider organizations, different CAPs, to say, this is what we came up with centrally. Let's react to this. You can kind of walk through the main reasons why we have low mental health screening are issues like stigma. And some of the stigma things are blank, blank, blank. Then you allow the community to have a conversation with you about what it means to them. What holds water, what resonates, and what kind of is like BS. So there's a lot of great ways to think about this. Then what you would do is once you have these root causes filled out on this diagram, you circle a bunch of them, and you come up with change ideas in a separate process. So if we want to address stigma as it relates to HIV, what are some of the things we can do? Well, it's a brightly pained stigma. So we have the People Living with HIV Stigma Index, we have the Health Policy Project, and we have a lot of other evidence-based interventions today that we can do to address stigma. We don't need to put that in a, back burner parking lot, like, oh, that's just how it is. We really need to stop doing that, frankly, as a community of providers. We've been doing this for a long time, and the science is amazing. The science that we heard with U equals U is amazing. The idea that it's now being used to overturn HIV criminal cases all over the country is amazing. We can come up with more things too socially, these social constructs, like the People Living with HIV Stigma Index, like the Health Policy Project, are things that we can bring out into our own work when appropriate and when it's tied to a root cause that we have validated with our community partners. This is another way to think about root cause, if that seems like too much structure for you. All of us have had experience with small children, and this is a fun exercise in everyone becoming a 4-year-old. I'm going to Palm Beach. Why? Because I'm helping all these nice people learn about quality management because they care about people living with HIV. Because HIV is a problem in Palm Beach. You know, so you basically keep asking the question why until you get to the bottom level. When you get to the bottom level and there's no more whys you can ask, then that's your root cause. Ta-da! Usually we call this the 5 whys because it's about 5 whys that until you get to the bottom. Sometimes it's a lot fewer, but we call it the 5 whys because basically you just want to ask yourself 5 times. It's really important to do this. It does organize and display all the causes and sub-causes. It's a way for you to write this down and save it in your computer and print it out and whip it out later. A lot of times what we have a problem with is sustainability. We do all this work, we put all this heart and effort into doing something, into solving a problem, and it shows. We have results. Go team. But what happens? Then we say, okay, next, and we focus, we shift our focus and come over here and look at this for a couple of years. And what happens? The performance falls right back to where it was to begin with. Our changes didn't stick, damn it. So the important thing is that we need to have a written idea, a sense of what we did and why and how. It's really important to write up our QI projects, which is one of the reasons why I like to think about them in terms of investigation. Discovery, root cause, and action. If you can write about it in that way, if you leave your job, or if something happens 20 years from now, someone else can come after you and pick up and find out what you did, and they don't have to recreate it for you. Driver diagrams. So this is my favorite thing to do. Fishbones, I think, are hard for people to wrap their mind around because it's a lot of steps in the process. First, you got to come up with your problems. Then you have to figure out which problems are the most important problems. Then you have to come up with change ideas for those problems. The one thing that's good about a root cause analysis is you're like, hey, there's a problem. What are all the other problems that are leading to this main problem? That's easy for people to wrap their minds around. Whereas drivers is the opposite. In a driver diagram, you need to think about what drives achievement instead of what drives failure. You want a clear picture of the team's shared view, and again, it's really important to involve as many people as possible, including consumers, when you do something like a driver diagram. Just like a cause and effect relationship, it's a diagram. It's all about relationships. We want to know the overall aim of the project, and then how we can achieve this aim in a large, broad stroke sense, but then more specifically, narrowing down individual things that feed into that broad, and that broader stroke sense. Then finally, we can come up with change ideas that are tied to each of those secondary causes. What we can do then is create this beautiful tree in a single meeting, maybe a 2-hour meeting. I've done this all over the state of New Jersey now, and in a couple of other states as well. You do this in 1 2-hour meeting, give people a bunch of dots, and then you have them vote for the things that resonate with them most in terms of change ideas. I mean, you've already done all the work. Everyone, the butts are already in the seats, right? They're already geared up, fired up. You've been talking with them all afternoon about this, so let them vote. Let them decide now. And then you can come later with more of a plan of attack in terms of how to organize those into a specific quality improvement activity. One of the things that's very important with this then, unlike a cause and effect diagram where it can be more esoteric or loosey-goosey, this needs to be more measurable because you're making your change ideas directly in the driver diagram itself. So you don't want to have too many primary drivers, just like we don't want to have have too many of those big buckets on the fishbone diagram. Remember, there are 4. So in a driver diagram, we recommend about the same number, 2 to 5. I use 3 personally. Secondary drivers are the influencers of the primary drivers, and so you normally want to name as many as you can. Just like we saw in the fishbone, each of those big categories had many lines on it. And sometimes those lines will all be filled up, and sometimes there's only going to be a couple things, and that's okay. As you identify each secondary driver, this is where you want to establish a way to measure it. And you need to be able to measure it in order to be able to identify specific improvements within it. So you can't just say things like new standard of care. You need to implement new standards that are rooted in policies and procedures. So you need to be very specific, because when all that extra detail makes it measurable, right? Do you have a standard that is rooted in policies and procedures? As opposed to revising standards. When you already have a standard, does that mean I have to change punctuation? Do I add a sentence? Like, what's that mean? Is that really measurable? You should always ask yourself that to make sure that you are aimed at excellence. I can't emphasize this enough, but I think that many others have emphasized this too, that it takes a team, it takes a village, and you must include the patient in the discussion. Otherwise, it's going to be really hard to have a clear idea of this really complex system. We've identified and already agreed that what happens to us as people is very important, as providers and consumers too, so that adds complexity to this issue. And not any one person or any single team will have all the answers. All right, step measurement. I normally just went through something that I go through in 30 minutes in 10. So I'm hoping that you're taking advantage of those bags. Like, I apologize, but I want to make sure that I get through all this material for you. This, I think, is the most important thing and is very novel. Let me just see, has anyone heard of step measurement before? We just started talking about this. All right, cool beans. So this actually came from the American Society for Quality. It's something that you can find for free in the Quality Progress journal, and it's from something, the article itself is called Branching Out. I have the reference for this on a slide, and you'll get the slide, you'll be able to click the link to it. Now basically the idea is that we are focused overall on leading outcome measurements. Think about this like viral suppression, right? What do we know about viral suppression? It's an annualized measure. The measurement period is always a year. You're looking for people who were seen in that year who had their most recent viral load untouchable. This is really good as a measure. It's a bellwether, right? It lets you know, dong dong, there's a problem here, dong dong, alpha. But it doesn't tell you much about what led to that, right? This is why we have process measures. Process measures are the things that we're actually changing, right? Because we're changing the processes we have in place to get a different result and to improve our performance in achieving that result. The problem is that for the most part, this is something that's very simple as well and is rooted in annualized cross-sections. When we look at annualized cross-sections insofar as the way that we can kind of tell if the work we're doing on the ground made a difference, it's not going to work. We're doing something where we're meeting with people to discuss ideas, innovate, change, come up with all kinds of solutions, and we're going to be rapid-fire implementing these solutions over the course of a week. So what the heck is an annualized measure that is run on the basis of months as a cutoff going to tell me? How long am I going to have to wait to see what the result is of the efforts that we did today? Is that a meaningful way to track and follow quality improvement? No. But it's the way that we all have been following and tracking quality improvement. So this is why it was important for folks to come up with this new idea, which is called process step measurement. So the idea here is that you come up with things within the process that you can break out as sub-measurements, the steps to that process being a whole process. It's custom made, it's just in time, and it's the kind of thing that, they talk about, oh yeah, quality improvement work you can do on the back of a napkin. And it makes you think, yeah, exactly. People are like, not with the provide enterprise measures, like that ain't no napkin, But when we think about quality with regard to just-in-time, custom-made measurement, yes, for step measures. And in fact, the step measures are going to be what we run over and over and over again PDSA cycles are tied to change ideas. And one cycle is for one change idea. If the change idea is successful, you might try doing more of it. If the change idea is not successful, you're going to throw it out. And how do you know it's successful? Stat measures. Let's look at this in a picture. So we can see outcome measurements. And see this is the link down here in ASQ and the information for this article. Here you can see the outcome measurement, so viral load suppression and how all the different process measures lead to viral suppression. And then within each process, there are several steps to think about. Then within those steps, we have our PDSA cycles, as I was discussing on the previous slide. Let's bring this to the ground with an example. So percentage of patients virally suppressed, leading outcome. Process measures. Screen for mental health challenges, that's a barrier to care, and facilitator to care that we've all talked about. Screen for substance use challenge, we definitely talked about that a lot today. Retained medical case management, we talked about that today. And percent retained medical care, we talked about that today. Let's just do ourselves a favor and talk about something else for a second, and look at mental health challenges. So what are the things that go into screening our patients for mental health challenges? What are the things? Well, we have a tool, right? The tool is delivered to patients either or it's a conversation. There's different ways to do this. There's different approaches, right? So you can make that a step measure too, how people are delivering this tool. But one of the things with regard to substance use, mental health, and a lot of these things that are highly stigmatized is that we know that different patients have different levels of comfort discussing different things with different people. There are plenty of stories out there where the medical assistant or someone who has a less formal connection with the patient will say, oh, well, the patient denies substance use, the patient denies alcohol, the patient denies tobacco, the patient denies marijuana. But then the peer navigator is like, oh, honey, you should have seen them last Friday at this party. They were dancing on the table with the biggest bunch you have ever seen. So, patient denied what? And what does this mean? we joke, but it's true, and we're laughing because it rings true, and it's also a point of frustration that weighs on us. You know? So, the percent of staff that believe responses are true, I think is a really cool step measure for this. Another idea, the percent of patients with a positive experience. If our change idea is, which I forgot to say, let's just pick one. A change idea is that we're going to have a case manager do the screening, and we're not going to have the medical assistant do it anymore. Okay? So it's a different type of clinical approach. So the change in percent of staff believing responses are true. You have a before and an after now, right? The percent of patients with a positive experience, you have a before and after now. Number of process map revisions. If you're having a different staff person do this, guess what? That affects two people's days. The medical assistant who no longer is responsible for this type of screening, and the case manager who now is. So how does this fit into their day and their patient flow? How do they jog and go from one room to the next as they're working with different patients with different levels of acuity and different needs? That's something to think about. Percent of staff receiving customer service training, percent of staff educated on BH and importance. These are all things that you can think about in terms of how we lead up to what goes into making sure that we're screening as many folks as possible effectively for mental health issues. We need to think about all these things on the bottom. So, normally what we do is we do a discovery and then we do a root cause analysis. So the little root cause analysis that we did that was very informal, we came up with some change ideas. So I'm going to go ahead and read these change ideas that we came up with, but there are change ideas already. As I said before, we're in luck. The county and the state have already gone through this process through the work group, and they have some ideas to pursue, but we had mentioned briefly decreasing silos, increasing communication, improved definitions around standards of care, increased trauma-informed care, increased patient focus, needing data on the true care continuum for all people living with HIV, not just Ryan White, needing data on viral load less than 20 to compare with viral load less than 200, acuity scale with standards and expectations and increased training for staff. One of the things that I think is really neat about this is when you have a lot of people who really care about something and have been working on it for a long time, good ideas are great, and they'll mesh. And I really see a lot of things meshing here between what the work group has already come up with the state and the county, and what you have discussed today. That's awesome. That shows a high level of affinity and a high level of, support behind some of these ideas. So we have about 10 minutes. So we're going to spend 5 minutes doing a really abbreviated version of what I was planning on doing. And we're going to just look at 5 of the change ideas that have been selected by the case management working group. We'll look at acuity scale, health outcomes, revision of standards, referral to agencies, so thinking about a referral network, and also thinking more broadly about the funding streams and how Ryan might fit into a much bigger picture within Palm Beach County and the surrounding areas. So the way that this is going to work is that all of you are seated at a table that is marked. Tables A, F, and K will focus on the acuity scale. Tables B, G, and L will focus on health outcome results related to hub services. Tables C, H, and M, revision of standards. Tables D, I, and N, referral to agencies, about the referral network. And tables E, J, and O, aligning with other systems. I don't know if we just write this down real fast. Instructions. So at your tables, we want you to discuss your assigned case management change idea. Using the post-it notes provided, we want you to write possible step measures, so thinking about the step measures that are associated with the change ideas that you're assigned. Right? So this means thinking outside the box, coming up with the things that you fit on the back of the napkin. Some things you can get out of provided, sure, but is that really just in time? So, think about this creatively. We want one step measure per post-it note. And then you'll see that there's different sheets around the room. There's 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And when you're done writing your ideas, I want you to just come and stick it up there. Oh, when you do this, I'd like for you to be interacting with other people who are sticking their ideas up there. Try to stick your ideas close to similar ideas. And interact with people as much as possible about what you see. If you're done early, feel free to go and help the others. I don't know if we will be because we have about 5 minutes. So think about the change ideas and you're assigning change ideas and then help them All right, let's go ahead and put our ideas up. If you are all done with this activity, raise your hand. Ooh, we are all done and we are ready to debrief. So a couple of things about this before we get to the debrief. Hey y'all, we are just about done, so let's just bring our attention back for just another couple of moments, please. So a couple of things about this. A, I'm going to be going ahead and photographing all of these, and they'll be sent in a package to Truna, Anita, and others, so that you have this as a way to think about this going on. Because this is actually the fruit of your passion and the fruit of your labor, and I know that you want to taste it. So we're going to make that happen for you. The other thing about this is that this is just a small sample of what you can do each time you come together. At your planning council meetings or through committees, you can find ways to chunk this activity up into those different phases and bring to life the data, the information, the patient stories, the provider stories. And one thing that I would like to point out is that there is currently the case management acuity work group that is forming. And if you're interested in learning more or working on this issue, please contact Shoshana. Her email is here and her phone number is here, should you not have it already. But please do join them in this exciting discussion. It's really an important time, and it's an opportunity for you to make a big difference in the way that services are being delivered and changed here. So, that being said, I don't think that I have time to really go around and read through these ideas, through these change ideas, because I know that you trust me that I'll send the pictures. But I just want to get some comments from you, some thoughts on this process. What do we think about this affinities exercise? And does this seem like something that we might want to replicate in other areas of our work? Yeah? We like? What did we like about it specifically?
Well, one of the things that I appreciate is that you get everyone else's perspective. Because, for example, I work the administrative part of Black and White, so I have to make sure that there's specific guidelines that I go with. But working at this table, there were so many different perspectives that it helps me see that it's not this one-sided in order to help the client the way that we need to help the client.
Thank you. So, is there a comment back here? No other comments? Oh, okay.
I think that one thing that was useful about this, at least for me, was a lot of times we deal with what seem like very large, insurmountable issues, and this provided us a good way to break it down into a series of smaller, seemingly more easily resolvable problems that can be measured. I think, at least as far as wrapping my mind around the issues, that assisted me a lot.
Cool. Absolutely. Thanks so much for that. That's the missing link in so many ways. I really like step measures. So in terms of...
I don't have the microphone. I was just going to read what you were saying. I think it's really important because we have people that are crucial in the delivery of services to our clients, and some are at a ground level, and some are at very high administrative or physician, whatever. And I think that it's really important that the decision makers, like administration, hear from and listen, not just hear from, but listen to what people who are doing the work with the clients and the consumers, both. They hear what the issues are and how we need to meet them, because if the administrators say, yes, we're going to do this, this, and this, and the consumers don't understand it, they don't come, then it's just wasted funding. So I think that this allows, if you work right, the administrators to really get a better feeling of what needs to be done and how it needs to be done.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And again, like when we say all levels, we want to engage people at all levels. Even at our own agencies, if we're with a subrecipient in the field, it's important to think about like your senior leadership, your most senior leadership, being involved in some of these conversations, even if they can't be there the whole time, to kind of come in and listen for 5 minutes, please. This is a really, really important discussion, and it's about keeping our doors open, frankly. So, we should all have some interest in that. Any last comments before I turn the mic back over? All right, thank you guys, absolutely.
We close out, we have one final presentation from the presentation.
I'm not going to take much of your time because like John said, he was between you and lunch, and I don't want to be between you guys and This has been a long day, and I must say a very enriched learning day. So I'm really grateful for Michael and all the speakers, the panel, the Care Council team for putting all of this together. I want to give a big round of applause to my team. If you all can stand up. Shoshana. 1st year the county did it, and I'm sorry, Anna, I forgot you. So we got a roadmap today from Michael, 1990, and now we all have to figure it out through all of these tools, how to make that happen. We have to live this moment today. Dr. Grossman said, it's a movement. So we really need to absorb all of this information and figure it out. You know, on Monday when we go back to our offices, go back to our work, how we can involve our patients, our consumers, and understand and how we can make that shift, how we can make that change. We really need to empower our patients, empower our providers, and most important, empower all of you so that we can make that change. Only then this vision will get into reality, and then Palm Beach County will be you equal you. So thank you so much. With our ISS department, and now he's with Inspector General's office, and I'm so glad that he helped us with this event. So thank you, Phil. Stick around. There are no amenities today, but this facility is beautiful, so take some time and enjoy the nature.